Hi, welcome back to Tiff Reads Books. I am Tiff and I read books. And then I talk to you about them because I like to talk. So I am going to do a little thing today that is really kind of kicking off over on Instagram, which has a kind of sister thing over here on YouTube. So I'm going to do a 10 before the end. 10 books I want to get through before the end of 2023. And I know over here it's mostly like final TBRs. I already did that on my other channel that I decided to like swap everything over. So I don't, this is kind of like a mini version because I already finished off a few of those ones from that list in the last like 2 or 3 weeks since I made that. So this is where we're at. We have 10 left of like the purchased books. Like you can see some gaps up there because I took them down. So these are the books that I purchased this year that I have not yet read and I want to finish off before the year because I just really think it would be nice to finish off everything that I bought this year. Not saying I'm not going to buy more because the thrift store is right around the corner from me and they have some great finds. Anyway, so this is what I'm reading right now, and by the time you see this video, excuse my large face there, by the time you see this video, I will have finished Anansi Boys. I really, really like it so far. There are some issues that I have with it, but this is Neil Gaiman. It's often, I think Goodreads calls it a sequel to American Gods. It's not really a sequel. It doesn't really have any of the same characters. But it is following, with the exception of like Mr. Nancy, but it's just set in the same world. You don't have to read American Gods before you read this. We are following the son of Mr. Nancy, who is a spider god, a storyteller, a web weaver, and he has 2 sons, and we follow the first one who doesn't have any sort of magical powers, at least so far. And is very much just a real man who has a string of mediocre luck and a mediocre average life, finds his brother who has magical powers, god powers, and kind of ruins his life. So that's where we're at in this one. Really fun, really enjoying it. So this one doesn't necessarily count, but I just wanted to check in real quick with what I am currently reading because I am always reading something. So 10 before the end. Okay, so number 10, because it's going to be one that I really want to finish soon. This is my last for my 23 and 23, Stephen King's The Institute. I believe I bought this book back in like 2021 and it sat on my nightstand because I didn't really start reading a whole lot again until this year. So this has been sitting on my nightstand. Eventually moved down here to shelves when I moved and got my like a nice place where I could have shelves. This is, I don't even remember what it's about. I know it's a portal story, I'm pretty sure, because Stephen King loves portals. Oh, we are following, it's a missing child story with some fantastical elements, maybe? Okay. Middle of the night, intruders silently murder young Luke Ellis's parents and steal him away from his suburban Minneapolis home. An operation that takes less than 2 minutes. Luke will wake up in a far away room that looks just like his own, except there's no window, and outside his door are several other doors, beyond which are several other kids with very special abilities who arrived here at wherever here is in the same way that Luke did. They're all confined to the area known as the front half, which is a good thing because no one ever returns from the back half. So, yeah. There's more on the synopsis, but this is, I set up a list of 23 books I wanted to read this year that both gave me some comfort books. Stephen King is a comfort author, something I know that I like, and had me branch out into new genres, new authors, things that Goodreads suggested because I like Stephen King and because I've liked things like American Gods and other things. So they suggested, I followed Goodreads suggestions. I found YouTubers who made videos about books that I had previously liked and picked other things that they liked, and so I made myself this 23 book list, and that is what kind of kicked me off this year. This is the very last one, so I will be wrapping that up as soon as I finish this one, so that's why this is higher on the list, as I have learned a lot about books and about myself, and it's something that I really want to talk about, so I'm looking forward to finishing this one. I just needed something a little smaller after going from Babel, which was a lot of pages, into this one, which I think is 600 and something pages, though it looks like some of it is a little excerpt from Billy Summers. So, yeah, this is like 640 something pages. So this one's going to be a long one. Following that, I really want to read Holly, especially now that I've seen that it's on the Goodreads Choice Awards list, which I did think it would be. Something that bothers me is that this is on the horror list. This is not horror. This is, if anything, a thriller. Holly Gibney she started off as a secretary for Bill Hodges, who was a private detective. And as Stephen King has developed her and grown her character, she gets to do some of the detectiving on her own. So now this is the one where she gets her own book. She's like Stephen King's comfort character right now. This is like his favorite person. He's been writing a lot about her. And it is very controversial in the Stephen King subs about whether or not we like her. And I have some thoughts on that. So I really want to read it because I really want to talk about how a lot of Stephen King fans in online spaces tend to react to female characters. And I have some thoughts on that. So this does reference Finders Keepers, which is the detective agency that Holly worked for. Holly must outthink and outmaneuver the shockingly twisted professors in this chilling new masterwork. So everything that I've read, this is a thriller. This is not a horror. There's no supernatural elements in it. There's no, it's a thriller. So I'm interested to read it and see if I, what I think about it. I have not read a lot. Okay, so Goodreads calls this Holly Gibney number 3. Yes and no, okay? So if anything, Holly was also in all 3 of the Bill Hodges books. So this would be Holly number 6 if it is Holly number 3, because The Outsider did not focus on Holly. She was a side character. I did read The Outsider a couple of years ago. I picked it up at the same time I picked up The Institute, and I just happened to read The Outsider, but not The Institute. That one was dark. That was definitely a horror, and Holly showed up near the very end as, part of the detective agency. The other one it lists is If It Bleeds, which I believe has a short story about Holly in it. I have not read that one, because you don't need to read anything else to read this one. This works as a standalone. Anyway, these are my 2 things that are more on the thriller, horror, darker side. Everything else might be a little bit, have some dark elements, but is more fantasy, sci-fi, speculative. So let's move on to the next category. I'm going to talk about the fantasy books that I want to read. I have a few of them. I don't have anything new. Okay, so these are all older books. This is a book I picked up in a blind date with a book. It was listed as a fantasy. I can't remember what the blurb on it said. It's a collection of short stories. It is edited by George R. R. Martin. In here, there are stories from Jim Butcher, Neil Gaiman, Robin Hobb. So I've never read a Jim Butcher. I've never read a Robin Hobb. So I thought that would be kind of cool. There's also some other... Jacqueline Carey is a fantasy sci-fi author that my boyfriend really likes, so he's been wanting me to read one of her books. Tanith Lee, I've heard that name, but I have never read anybody in here with the exception of Neil Gaiman, because I have just never really read a lot of fantasy. Everything I've read I tend to like, but I've never really read a lot of it. So excited to read through this. I think there's 18 short stories in here. I'm going to be rolling a d20 to pick the order in which I read them, so I'm excited about that. I'll talk next about the fantasy that scares me the most is this one. So this is the T.H. White's The Once and Future King. It has this Camelot thing up here because this is actually from the version where they made the show, but it is the actual Once and Future King. This book looks small. These pages are essentially vellum. They are so thin, so thin. This is actually a 630-ish page book. It's set in 4 parts. So this is a retelling of King Arthur, and I happened to stumble across this one and I picked it up because, and I'm really excited about this, I was doing a couple of videos earlier this year. I listened to Morgan Is My Name, which is listed as a feminist retelling of the King Arthur tale centered around Morgan Le Fay. And when I read that blurb, I went, wait a minute. There was a feminist retelling of King Arthur when I was a kid that everyone told me to read and I never got around to, called The Mists of Avalon. And I was like, huh. So I listened to the Sophie Keach, Morgan Is My Name, and I had some opinions on it. And I might talk about that later once I finish this. I'll talk about all 3 of them. So then I went and I listened to the first book of The Mist of Avalon, because I couldn't find all of them together. So The Mist of Avalon, just like this one, is written in 4 parts, and each part is a book, essentially. So I was able to find it on the Libby app. The first one, which is the Mistress of Magic, is the name of the first book, and it follows up nearly to the same point where Morgan Is My Name does. So that's kind of why I only listened to that, because I wanted to compare those. So because the Morgan Is My Name will apparently have more books to do the exact same number as T.H. White's Once Future King and Marion Zimmer Bradley's The Mist of Avalon. So I'm really curious to see how this compares to the two, because I have heard that this is actually like one of the best retellings of the King Arthur's tale, and it follows along with the original one, I think, which is something with the name that starts with an M, and I cannot remember who wrote it, but it's a really old one, and I don't like classic literature very much. I just can't handle the plotting style, pacing, and the writing style. Anyway, so this one I'm scared for. It's dense. There's a lot of stuff there. And then we'll follow up with some more kind of that era fantasy with The Princess Bride. This one I'm really excited about. This is the 25th anniversary edition. The Princess Bride is one of my comfort movies. I used to watch this and Jim Henson's Labyrinth when I was really sad. And I found this one has this really gorgeous color, full color map in it. Half Price Books is my favorite place. So this is the 25th anniversary edition, which was published in 1988. And I think it's pretty cool that this is now 2023. So we are now 25 years past. So this is technically the 50th anniversary of this book. And that is kind of exciting to me. So then I'm going to follow it up with Shadow and Bone. So a little bit more of a recent written fantasy. So I think I'll have a little bit easier time with this. And this isn't the order I'm going to read these books in. This is just the order it makes sense to talk about them in at the moment. So this is a fantasy story with magic. It's a magical girl story from what I was reading. But I don't know a whole lot about it. I have avoided learning a lot about it. I have avoided the Netflix show because I wanted to read the book, and everyone talks about how great of an author Leigh Bardugo is, and I have not read anything written by Leigh. So I thought I would give this one a go. This is fantasy, but make it Russian. So I thought that would be kind of fun to read. I've read a couple of fantasy set in Asia this year. I read Rin Chapecko's The Bone Witch trilogy, which is based on Filipino lore, and I read the first Iron Widow book, which are both set in Asian or based around Asian cultures and are fantasy sci-fi, because Iron Widow, everyone kept calling it fantasy, and then I picked it up, I was like, this is sci-fi. We got like mech battles. Anyway, that's a whole other thing too. So then I will jump to the dystopians. So this is a dystopian novella. It's not very long. This one I plan on throwing in, it's only like 220 pages. I plan on throwing it in whenever I need a break from the big chunky boys. This is I believe it's a post-apocalyptic story about a group of kids who, I believe, they basically go on like a camping type trip or something like that. They're out in the woods. Their parents are like hanging out in the cabin partying, and the kids are left on their own, and this is following the children. So that's most of what I know about it. I can't remember. I watched a couple of videos on it, but I do not remember like the synopsis of it, but I remember that it sounded intriguing. So when I saw it at the thrift store, I picked it up. Most of my books are thrift store. Nearly all of these are thrift store or secondhand finds, except for Holly and the fantasy collection. So then, keeping with the dystopian, but moving into a little bit of sci-fi, this one is Future Home of the Living God, and I got this recommendation originally from Reads with Rachel. She said that if you like The Handmaid's Tale, this is something by an Indigenous author that you should read. And my friend has been pushing me to read or The Handmaid's Tale or watch the show, but I was like, I just can't deal with that. She's been pushing me to watch it since 2016, and I have just been resisting because emotionally I don't know, but reading something from a different perspective could potentially work for me. And then I was in my library and I was walking down the aisle, and it was like, hey, if you like Handmaid's Tale, you should read Future Home of the Living God. But then they didn't have it. And then I was walking down my local bookstore, and they were like, hey, if you like If you like Handmaid's Tale, you should read Future Home of the Living God. And then they didn't have it. They had a different Louise Erdrich book. And then I found this at my thrift store. So I picked this one up. So this is my sci-fi dystopian book that I will be reading and I'm excited about. And other than that it is comparable to The Handmaid's Tale, and it has an ultrasound on the cover, which makes me a little uncomfortable. I don't like pregnancy, birth, motherhood stuff. So we'll see how this goes for me. But I am looking forward to that. It does have a damaged page and I'm really upset about it. 2 books left. I just stopped counting. So this is actually a bind up of 3 books. So, but they're all short novellas. So this is Binti, which is, it's sci-fi, and I believe it is set in a university, and I know that it's set on a spaceship, and that's about all I know about it, and it's like Afrofuturism. I read Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor, and Okorafor. I really should have looked up how to pronounce her name before I did this, but I'm a dick. So I read Who Fears Death, and I had a lot of opinions on it. I thought it was really powerful, really impactful, but I thought there was some issues with certain presentations of things in it. But I did really enjoy it overall, so I thought I would try something a little bit different by her as well, because I do like her voice. I like what she talks about. I just think there was a couple of things in there that fell flat for me. I may talk about them later at another point, but that book I really recommend, especially considering we're talking about genocides a lot in social media spaces right now, considering everything that's going on with Palestine. And other people have brought up that, hey, there are still genocides going on in Congo and Sudan. And considering Who Fears Death talks, it is a Afrofuturism version of genocide in Sudan. And she literally based it on a news article that she read nearly 10 years ago. So I recommend reading it, but it is graphic. There is graphic essay in it because we as in the characters in that world use essay as a form of genocide. So, and the way that she's written that in is terrifyingly powerful, but there's lots of repeats of the scene, which is graphically described. But we'll see. That's not this one. That's just me talking about the author's other work that I have read. So yeah, so we're following a girl named Binti in space, and she's got to do a thing, and that's all I know. Okay, last book. Last Sci-Fi is also a thrift store find. I really need to pull stickers off before I start talking about books. This is Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. And interestingly enough, this is actually a university bookstore copy. So someone took a class where they taught this book. And this is sci-fi and a discussion of gender and its role in societies. We are following I think 2 characters. One is an alien from the planet Winter, where there is no gender. And the other character is a human ethnologist who is sent to study those people. So I've listened to some reviews where this can be a little boring, a little slow, but it is also, according to everyone that I have listened to talk about it, regardless of how they feel about the pacing, that it's a really powerful, impactful, and insightful read. So I will be reading this before the end of the year. So those are my 10. The one I think I'm the most excited about, I don't even know which one I'm most excited about. I'm looking forward to reading Shadow and Bone because it has been so hyped and so many people have been talking about it. But then I am also looking forward to the short story collection to get some introduction to some other authors that I haven't experienced before. So I'm looking forward to those. And then I am really scared of both The Left Hand of Darkness and The Once and Future King. And a Princess Bride a little bit, because what if I don't like it as much as I like the movie? Anyway, so that's what I'm going to be reading for the rest of the year, along with other things in between, because if I keep the pacing that I was keeping in October, I will be reading more than this. However, I tend to read about 6 at most physical books a month, and then everything else is audiobooks and maybe a digital one thrown in here or there. I do have some audiobooks I'm listening to, but they aren't necessarily on the list. I'm finishing up the Adam Binder series, which is a YA queer urban fantasy that I'm really enjoying. The last book is called Deadbeat Druid. So I picked it up because the name, it was White Trash Warlock was the name. And I was like, oh yes, I need to read this. And then the second book was, oh God, what was it? White Trash Druid, Trailer Park Trickster. And then this one is Deadbeat Druid. And so I'm finishing up that one. I'm like halfway through, but I just haven't listened to an audiobook in a little while. I picked up a V.E. Schwab book, the first of the Magical London one. Was, I can't remember the name of it, but I picked that one up free on Audible, so that's gonna be another one of my reads. And every month I am rereading a Stephen King book, so I'm trying to decide. I'm rereading them through Audible, trying to decide if I want to read, I keep pointing down there but you can't see, if I want to read Insomnia, which was one of my favorites, or if I want to do one of the short story collections, or I don't know. I also have like The Regulators and Desperation down there, which I really liked, and maybe I'll do those back to back, like The Regulators and then Desperation, or Desperation and then The Regulators, one or the other, but I like The Regulators better. So maybe I'll do The Long Walk. I don't know. I gotta pick a reread. So if you have a suggestion of what Stephen King I should reread, I've read almost his entire like anthology, I think, is that the word? I've read almost everything he's written, with the exception of like the newer stuff and a few of the old ones that are harder to find, but I have read a very good chunk of his books. So if you have a suggestion on what I should reread in November for Stephen King and December for Stephen King, throw it in the comments, let me know, and I will reread it if I haven't reread it already. Doggo's coming to say hi, so I'm gonna wrap this up because it's getting way too long for just this short little video that I wanted to do. So I hope you enjoyed that, and if you have read any of these things, please let me know in the comments. If you haven't read any of these things but really want to, please let me know down in the comments. If you want a reading vlog of one of these or multiples of these, throw it in the comments and I'll do a reading vlog. Yeah, let me know what you want to see out of this stack, what you want to see more of, what you want to know deeper thoughts of. Let me know anything that comes to your mind on this down below in the comments, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe button, and I will see you next week.